Hey guys, my name's Sam and welcome to Paramedic. Today we are addressing a huge misconception in the law enforcement community. We're going to do a reaction video to the San Diego County Sheriff's Department's Dangers of Fentanyl PSA. All right, so for those of you that are not aware of the situation, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department recently released a video of what they claim is a fentanyl overdose by one of their deputies on scene. The reason I'm doing this video today is because for those of you that have been following me for a while, you know that I've done a video in the past talking about the myths of fentanyl overdoses. Long story short, and I'm not going to get into a lot of the science and the studies because I've already done a video on that. I'll leave that up here for you guys to check out for it if you haven't seen it. But long story short, contact exposures causing OD to fentanyl are almost impossible. We don't have a single documented case of it happening. The only time that it's ever happened was with weaponized fentanyl in the Moscow theater hostage situation. That weaponized fentanyl is not on our streets. It's not something that's available to drug dealers. The contact exposures of deputies and other law enforcement officers that we have seen on video have largely been attributed to the Nocebo effect, which is basically a reverse placebo where you come in contact with something you perceive to be harmful and your body gives you a lot of psychosomatic symptoms where you feel like you're dying. Now, this is not to say anybody's faking it. This is saying that this is a psychosomatic issue. It's your brain making you feel bad, making you feel like you're dying. Some other things that this have been attributed to is general anxiety, which is no wonder because we've been training law enforcement officers for years that fentanyl will kill them. Even the smallest grain of carfentanil will cause sudden death and could kill half of Manhattan, which it's simply not true. So I've got that video, link it down below. You can check that out. I've linked a lot of the research articles from that down below as well to kind of illustrate how this isn't possible. But I'm going to be going through this video because it was sent to me by a bunch of different subscribers asking me to kind of break it down because there's a lot of confusion. Hey, why did this deputy have this reaction? Why does it look the way it does? And what clues you in as a medical professional that this isn't a opiate OD. Now, for those of you that are going to come at me and say like, hey, you don't know what it's like. You're not a law enforcement. You have no idea what the job's like, what kind of stress these guys are under. To a certain extent, you're right. When I was a law enforcement officer, I was a reserve deputy sheriff in Iowa. We were lower call volume than these guys. I don't claim to have the same experience, but I was on their SWAT team. Right now, I'm a SWAT paramedic on two different pretty high call volume SWAT teams. So I do have some experience there. I work with law enforcement officers all the time. I respect the heck out of them. But we have to nip this in the bud because this false information is harming people. So with all of that preamble, let's get into this reaction video.
I'm San Diego County Sheriff Bill Gore. What you're about to see is traumatic body-worn camera footage involving one of our deputies who was exposed to fentanyl during his patrol shift.
So this guy is the sheriff. He's the head honcho of a super big law enforcement department. Now, I've seen some interviews with him after the fact. I've seen some written apologies about this video and all of that. I don't think he's a bad dude. I don't think this was made in malice. I think he cares about his guys. I think he took everything at face value and he made a rash decision to release this video, but I don't think he's a bad dude. I think he just cares about his guys and wanted to get the word out.
You're okay. Don't be sorry. There's nothing to be sorry about. I got you, okay? I'm not gonna let you die. I'm not gonna let you die. It's okay, just focus on your breathing, okay? Focus on it. I need Narcan! I'm Corporal Scott Crane from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. My trainee was exposed to fentanyl and nearly died. It was our first radio call of the day, and this was Deputy Five Eyes' radio call. He found a white substance that he suspected was drugs.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's a powder.
It could be cocaine or fentanyl. Dude.
It tested positive for fentanyl.
So what they just described there, there's two things I want you to take note of. Number one is the relationship between the guy that was just interviewed and the guy that had the reaction. So the guy that was just interviewed is the field training officer. He's a very experienced deputy. He's there training new people. And the person that had the reaction is under a tremendous amount of stress. The field training processes for law enforcement agencies, it's no joke. You can get fired for anything. You are evaluated every second of every day. So you're already under a lot of stress. Now, what they just talked about here is they ran what I believe is a field test. They're basically these kits that you mix a little bit of the powder into it. It'll change colors based on what the substance is, whether that's, heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, you name it. It's going to just help you identify that. And it basically helps prevent you from putting somebody away because they had a little bit of baby powder in a bag.
That stuff's no joke, dude. It's super dangerous. I was like, hey, dude, too close. You can't get that close to it. A couple seconds later, he took some steps back and he collapsed.
All right, so here's the first part that kind of clues me into this being a nocebo reaction or not an opiate overdose, more of a psychosomatic issue. They had gotten that powder out. They had ostensibly handled it, maybe with tools or whatever, but it was out. They put it in their field test. They ran the test. They found it to be fentanyl. After all of that, that's not a quick process. After all of that, the FTO goes, oh crap, that's fentanyl. That's super dangerous, dude. So now you have this super experienced deputy telling this inexperienced deputy that this is really dangerous and that you need to look out and you need to be super careful. And it wasn't until those words came out of his mouth that the trainee had his reaction. Now, that trainee has probably been told in academy, he was probably taught about this. He probably knew about the, quote, dangers of fentanyl before that because we've all seen it on the news. We've seen it highly publicized. So all of that fed into this, and now his FTO is telling him it's dangerous, and he has this reaction that seems a little bit odd. The initial presentation of this OD doesn't look like a typical OD. I've seen a ton in my career. I've been a paramedic for almost 9 years. I was an EMT before that. So I've seen hundreds of overdoses, and it's not something that like 1 second you're standing, you're fine, and the next second you're on your back. A user or somebody that's been given a lot of fentanyl in a hospital setting even, they'll be given it, they might get kind of dizzy, like, oh man, I don't feel so good, and they basically go to sleep. It's not something that it just knocks them out right away. It's something that's more of a gradual onset of feeling unwell or of feeling super, super drowsy. Drowsy, I think, is the better way to describe it.
I ran over to him, and I grabbed him, and he was ODing. And I went to my trunk, I grabbed the Narcan, came down to him, grabbed him, and I did one nasal spray in one nostril, opened the other one, another nasal spray in the other one.
I remember.
So he took 2 of those nasal sprays of Narcan, and he administered to the trainee. So one thing to note here is that the breathing difficulty that's experienced in an overdose, it's not sudden onset. This is something somebody just stops caring. They stop breathing. So the fact that he would be apneic or wouldn't be breathing that soon after collapsing, like seconds after collapsing, that doesn't quite add up. And the second part to this is that each of those nasal sprays he gave, they're 4 milligrams each. For context, on an ambulance, we give 0.5 or 0.4 milligram doses up to 2 milligrams to get somebody breathing again. So we're giving these pretty small doses. This deputy, this trainee, just got 8 milligrams put up his nose in a matter of seconds. 8 milligrams. That's substantially more than we would give pre-hospitally right off the bat. So right there, like if that doesn't reverse it, I mean, it's not an overdose. We already know this isn't an overdose, but in that case, that is a lot of Narcan given to somebody. Potential harmful effects of it, really not too much. You can give a lot of Narcan before anything really bad happens. Now, the reason that I say I would still like to see Narcan use come down a little bit in the law enforcement community is because anytime you give somebody a medication, there's a chance of reaction. There's a chance for something bad to happen. There's some reports in these chronic users, if you give them that much Narcan right away, you can cause flash pulmonary edema. You can potentially cause seizures. Generally speaking, though, it's relatively safe.
Just not feeling right, and then I fall back. And I don't remember anything after that.
Just breathe, buddy. Breathe.
Trying to get him to focus on just breathing. And because, that fentanyl, you can't breathe.
It was in an instant. It's as though my lungs just locked up. I couldn't breathe.
Here, I think, is the point that really shed some light on what was going on. He was describing a physical difficulty breathing. That's not really how fentanyl or opiates cause you to stop breathing, because apnea or lack of breathing is a symptom of these opiates. However, that's not really how this works. So when you overdose on heroin or fentanyl or morphine, anything like that, you basically stop caring. People stop feeling like they need to breathe. They just kind of go to sleep and they stop breathing. My wife was given just a little bit too much fentanyl in the hospital after a procedure she had, and she woke up and she said she remembered looking at the pulse oximeter, which is the O2 percentage, and it was saying like 98, 95, 90, 85, and it started to alarm, and she had stopped breathing, and she didn't care. Her body, the impulse to breathe just wasn't there until the nurses came over and they're like, hey, can you breathe for us? She started breathing. It was all good. So the feeling of physically being inhibited from breathing really is not indicative of a fentanyl overdose. These people don't say like, oh, it was hard for me to breathe, because it doesn't do anything physically to impede your chest or to make it so your lungs aren't working. It just makes you careless. So that right there doesn't quite add up for a fentanyl overdose.
I was trying to gasp for breath, but I couldn't breathe at all.
Five, are you okay? Talk to me.
Sorry.
Oh, no. Don't be sorry. You're okay.
All right, now I need to stop right here and just reiterate this for you guys watching. Just because this wasn't a fentanyl overdose, just because all signs are kind of pointing to a psychosomatic reaction, doesn't mean that this wasn't really traumatic for these guys. This FTO has a guy under his charge, and he believes his life's in danger. And this guy feels like he's going to die. This is traumatic for them. So I do not want anybody to take this as I'm bashing on them, saying they're faking. I'm making this because I don't want other people to be this afraid when they're coming in contact with this powder. The more you know, the less chance of having these psychosomatic reactions there are. So that's why this is going out. It's for information, but this is nothing against these guys. This guy is not a wuss. He's not anything like that. He had a very scary reaction. So that's all I'm going to say there.
Don't be sorry. There's nothing to be sorry about. I got you, okay? I'm not going to let you die. I need Narcan. I got you.
I'm trying to not let him go.
All right, so this is another 4 milligrams of Narcan being administered. So that brings the total up to 12 milligrams of Narcan, which, once again, our initial dose is usually 0.4 milligrams in increments up to 2 milligrams. So this is a lot of Narcan for an exposure that we didn't even see. He didn't ever describe getting powder on him. He's outside in a well-ventilated area. There's not a ton of particulate in the air. So the chances that this is anything else are very slim.
Like, I wanted him to know he wasn't alone. It's an invisible killer. He would have died in that parking lot if he was alone. Fire department got there, put him on the gurney. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he started to OD again. And he was ODing the whole way to the hospital.
So this is something that we need to address with Narcan. So Narcan is also called naloxone, and it's the antidote. It's what they've been given to this patient for opiate overdose. It's very common to be given. Now he's describing, he's overdosing again. Really, the half-life of Narcan, we're talking, 10 to 30 minutes. This is going to last for a while in these patients. Now, there are times where you do have to redose Narcan in these patients because the half-life of heroin, fentanyl, morphine is longer than your Narcan. So what you'll do is you'll revive somebody from an overdose, and then they'll start to OD again, and you have to give them some more. Even so, the doses that were given to this deputy, like if this was an opiate OD, he'd be awake. The re-OD wouldn't be an issue until much down the line in the hospital after he's been observed for, half an hour to an hour. That's when you might see that happening again if it was an OD.
I don't think people realize the severity of just how deadly it really is. I'm Deputy David Five-Eye, and I almost died of fentanyl overdose.
One of the greatest threats we currently face is a synthetic opioid fentanyl, which is 50 times more potent than heroin. Fentanyl overdoses are on the rise throughout our county. Every day, deputies recover fentanyl in our communities. And the county jails are not immune either to the dangers of this drug. Every week, sheriff's deputies intercept fentanyl entering our facilities. When inmates overdose on fentanyl, smuggled into our jails, deputies and nurses are saving dozens of lives every month by administering naloxone, a medicine used to rapidly reverse the effects of the overdose. Fentanyl deaths in California have increased almost 46% in just the last year. Being exposed to just a few small grains of fentanyl could have deadly consequences.
All right, so up until the end, what he was saying is true. I can attest to it. We've seen a ton more overdoses in the last couple years than we were before. And fentanyl is deadly. It's not deadly on an incidental exposure. And that's really the divergence that we're talking about here. So if you have fentanyl in the air and around you as a powder and it's on your skin, that cannot cause an overdose. We have good science and data to suggest that that is almost impossible unless you got a bathtub of that powder and you're bathing in it. It took us years to develop fentanyl patches that can absorb through the skin, and a lot of research dollars to make that happen. This street fentanyl, it's not causing that whatsoever. However, fentanyl is more potent and stronger when it's put into heroin. So every time a dealer gets a brick of heroin, it gets cut and they put other stuff into it. A lot of times this is powders, but they'll also supplement that with like crushed up fentanyl pills and other things like that, which if the end user doesn't realize that it's been cut with a strong opiate, then they're going to take their normal dose and they're going to overdose a lot easier. So it is really dangerous for drug users to have fentanyl in their heroin because it raises the potency and raises the chance that they will overdose. So that's all true. We are seeing a resurgence of it. We are seeing a lot of people die from these overdoses, but these overdoses are not from contact highs. I'll point out that this bag of white powder that was found in this car, they have a suspect in custody, presumably, and that suspect was going to ingest it in some way, either snort it, which is not the same as inhaled, snorting is different, or they were going to most likely inject it. And basically this microscopic amount, the notion that this microscopic amount inhaled or absorbed dermally for this deputy caused this overdose, when somebody was about to take a majority of that powder and inject it into their arm and probably live, even if they did overdose, that doesn't quite add up. Because at that rate, like even if a microscopic amount dermally caused them to overdose, then just the second that needle touched somebody's skin, they die instantly, regardless of what kind of immunity they've built up from chronic uses. So that right there doesn't make a lot of sense. And right at the end, he says just a few granules could kill somebody. That's not true. We know that's not true. Fentanyl is a very common drug. We give that on the ambulance almost every single day. It's common for people to have prescriptions for it. But regardless of your views on, the war on drugs and all of that stuff, that's not what this video is about. Fentanyl deaths are rising from overdose, just not dermal exposures.
The dangers of fentanyl are real, and this drug is killing our communities. Please take the time to share this video. It might save the life of your son, daughter, friend, or a loved one.
So at the end of the day, I understand, why they wanted to make a PSA. They've got a community that has a lot of drugs in it. They're seeing people die from it. They want to prevent that. So, they're putting this video out to show the dangers of it. The problem is that they could have picked any other situation to really do a PSA about. This situation here was a psychosomatic reaction. We have data to support that. The video in and of itself supports that. So at the end of the day, I understand the heart behind it, but it's really misinformation. And the problem with that is, and the reason that I'm making this video is because if we continue to tell the law enforcement community that this thing is super dangerous, they're going into situations, they're already afraid of so much. They already have so much on their minds. And this is just one more thing adding to that they don't need to be afraid of. They don't need to be afraid of this white powder. I don't want them to be afraid of that. The more they know, the less prevalent these psychosomatic reactions are going to be. Like I've said several times in this video, I am not intending for this to be, a bash on these deputies or the sheriff's office, anything like that. But this is medical misinformation, and it is important that the truth gets out there. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and I will see you next week.